Gillett, it's really good to talk to you. I know you've been in New Zealand 8 years, and we're very lucky to have you here. A businessman, a bit of a visionary, actually. But you came across my radar just last week when I was talking to Brenton Faithfull, and then he got a hammering from Sean Plunkett. Many Kiwis are upset by that. What's your take on that interview?
Yeah, it was disgraceful. Yeah. I listened to the interview in full. I was driving to Auckland at the time, and anger was my first reaction. My second was to make a phone call and express my disgust in what I thought was just gutter journalism. And the irony is that he didn't receive the phone call, but the Wright family did. And
the Wright family who fund the platform.
They fund the platform, yeah, correct. And so thankfully I've got a good friendship there with Wayne Wright, and I expressed to him my thoughts about how that interview went. And the irony is I mentioned I could not get through on Talkback, and he said, well, that's because he's off with COVID at the moment. I thought, oh, isn't that the very thing he's vaccinated against? He had a bit of a chuckle, but needless to say, the conversation went on, and I think he felt similar. I think, but you know, I think Wayne has to have some degree of Sean is Sean, and Sean will interview in the style that Sean interviews. I guess I probably wanted to say this and remind Wayne and also Sean of this, is refamiliarise yourself with the code of ethics in journalism. In fact, I take the liberty to say that to all people in journalism and the media, is make yourself familiar once again with that code of ethics. I've read it, you should too, and it's a rarity these days to see any journalist act in accordance with it. And certainly Sean wasn't. He didn't give Brenton the ability to speak nearly at all. He attacked him from the word go when he thought, and I emphasise thought, he knew where Brenton was going. Brenton, I don't believe, was making any assertions about what, or any conclusive statements about what he had observed, but it was clearly just trying to get across two main points. And if I hadn't have heard your interview with Brenton, I probably wouldn't have known what those main points were through the interview with Sean Plunkett. And those 2 points were very clearly broken down. They were very clearly, I've been in the game for 40 odd years, and I'm seeing things now in the embalming process that I've never seen before. And that is to do with some kind of, for use of a better word, I'd say, blood clotting, because these things look nothing like clots that I'm pulling out of people. I've never seen that before. Not making a conclusion, but saying there is an anomaly, and it would be fair to think that that would warrant further investigation. And so I believe that's all Brenton was really saying. The other anomaly was the fact that he had obviously documented 150 odd people, and in that 150 people, his other observation was that from the questions he was asking the families, is that these people had been vaccinated 2 weeks earlier, or less than 2 weeks earlier. Now, if Sean was very quick to, in his words, drive a truck through his data, I thought, how obnoxious. Firstly, there is no truck being driven through that at all. It is, and could easily be said, that's a statistical anomaly. Not the fact that 95% of the population are vaccinated and therefore old people die. We all know that, Sean. Thank you. Right? What is the anomaly is the fact that it happened, right, to 90%, or it might have been 95.
95%.
95% of the people that he asked, it had happened within 2 weeks of getting the vaccine. That's a statistical anomaly. Without making conclusions once again, I would say he had a very reasonable case to put forward to say, I think this warrants further investigation. And I do not believe he got the ability to say that, to even get those words out. And for me, that was a disgrace, and I've made it known.
This is so refreshing. This is critical thinking, which is what has been lacking in New Zealand and among New Zealanders. And this is where we each have to go now. There's something wrong when someone like that, who's just offering evidence and saying, let's have some kind of inquiry.
Correct.
When they get slammed to that extent.
Yeah, and the greater concern there is anyone who thinks, and whistleblowing is such an important part of our culture, particularly now, it should be, of every Western culture, or Eastern for that matter, holding authority to account and making sure they are remaining honest when they're in positions of power. That is a luxury, and they should be held honest. And to have people like Sean who are effectively scaring off people from coming out and discussing their observations, I think is a blight on any democratic society. Certainly shouldn't be happening in places like New Zealand.
Brian, you put that really well. It's a seminal moment for whistleblowers. Brenton, bless him, is saying, I will not be crushed. I will not be put off. I've got too many messages of support. I'll keep blowing the whistle. And he's calling out for other whistleblowers to join him. What do you say to people who are right on that cusp? Maybe a nurse in a hospital, a doctor who's been staying silent but is seeing, I don't know, babies dying.
Yeah.
And saying nothing. What do you say to those whistleblowers? They could be whistleblowers.
I say take time out and get a forest from the trees view of your life and of humanity and of New Zealand and the greater picture, and understand that a little bit of pain, often good things come from a little bit of pain, but regardless, what do we want our kids to learn from us as adults? We want them to learn that regardless of what tyranny stands in front of you, you stand up. Often we hesitate because we don't know what's on the other side of our decisions. And that's natural for humans to do. That's the unknown. But in that, something special happens. In that, when you stand up for what is right and you speak truth into the situation or into people, something beautiful happens at that stage, and you might be slammed. You might be cut down, but don't let that be a barrier, because ultimately it's the young ones who are going to look on, and they are going to draw strength, and other people are going to draw strength from your ability to stand up and say what's right at the right time, which is now. In fact, it was years ago, but no time like the present.
Absolutely. Two things stand out from that answer: that you take a macro view of life and of business and of the way you conduct yourself. You very easily pull back and see the bigger picture, don't you, Brian?
Well, yeah, I'm a natural big picture person. I actually find it more comfortable than small. They say the devil's in the detail. I force myself into that, and it kind of annoys me. I prefer to be thinking big about things and thinking about opportunity and ideas, bigger ideas, because I think that's how we all expand, and that's how the world becomes a better place, and we make that pie bigger for everyone. So yeah, I naturally do that, but I think sometimes that could be a learned behaviour. I don't know. I don't know if it's a muscle people need to exercise. But I would say that it probably pays to get a little bit of perspective and go, if I don't speak, then who does? If I don't act, then who does? And I'm not worried about what people think, because that's what I'm trying to teach my children, by the way. So we need to walk the talk.
7 times this Prime Minister's gone after me with character assassinating trolls and a real program of going after to try to get me off the scent. And the more she does it, the more something beautiful does happen inside. That was the other thing in your answer. What is that beautiful thing? You said something beautiful happens when you stand up with courage.
Well, it's that logos statement, isn't it? It's that truth speak. It's that ability to speak truth into something, changes something biological about that even. When we speak into our children, our words have meaning. Our words have they can either build something up or they can cut it down. So each time she goes after you to personally attack, you should consider that a badge of honour. You've come on her radar. You've ruffled her, not with an intention to do that. Of course, we would all love nothing more than Jacinda to go, I recognise my shortcomings. I recognise what I've done and how I've treated people, and I recognise that the agenda and stuff that I'm following is not right. It's not the best for New Zealand. And the people don't want it.
Yeah. The people don't want it anymore.
Correct. And yet at any stage, Jacinda, come out, hand on heart, and go, I got it wrong. And I know Kiwis would welcome you back, because that's the sort of people they are. But it's the person that can't acknowledge their wrongdoing and continues to attack others. But back to your point, I guess that truth speak, yeah, there is something, I don't know what that is. It's a bit of magic, I guess, that you do it and you don't know what's on the other side. And I guess it's that faith element. You go, I'm going to send that letter, and I have no idea what's going to happen next. And I don't care because it's right.
Well, that brings us perfectly to a letter I have here. 20 November 2021, Tauranga.
You got it.
This is from Director Brian Gillett, and I would like you to read this letter. It is an absolutely crucial letter for all Kiwis.
Yeah. When I wrote this, it was I was sitting there in Austin, Texas, and I just asked my PA, I said, listen, I need to put something out. People need to know, right? And she obviously, as she does a good job of, she tries to talk me out of things. But she wasn't talking me out of this, and she drafted the first version and sent it through to me. And I mean, I wouldn't even call it watered down. She, of course, is trying to protect my interests, as she would say. She's thinking about the other side.
Yeah. What were you thinking about?
I was sitting there throughout the whole process. I deleted all of hers and I rewrote it from scratch. And I was thinking to myself, you just need to say what's right. That's all. And you need to not. Every time you go to try to think of what's going to happen next, stop thinking of that. Do what's right. And hit that send button. And so this is what I drafted. And then afterwards, as you know, she asked me if I wanted to put it on Facebook. And I see it again without hesitation, put it on. And, you know, it went silly from there. And
it went absolutely viral because it's written so much from the heart and from a very good intellect. This is when the mandates were starting to come to their height.
That's correct, yeah. So the letter is written as such. We are writing to you to inform you of our policy around the New Zealand government's traffic light system, rights of the individual and our stance on it. It is our policy at BGT Developments to uphold the individual's freedoms in line with human rights charters and the New Zealand Bill of Rights. Our staff will not be subject to coercion or bullying of any kind. Their jobs will not be threatened from their decision, and we will vehemently oppose any attempt by any authority to use BGT Developments or our employees to achieve their medical objectives. They will make decisions that are right for them and their family, and we will respect that, as we respect the decisions made by our customers. They will never be asked for their medical history or to justify whether they have or have not had a vaccine. We will most certainly not aid and abet a medical apartheid in New Zealand. Freedom is not a privilege given to you by governments. Freedom is a right given to every human being on earth by God. We know freedoms of the individual are inalienable. They cannot be taken away or removed regardless of the threat, perceived or real. If you hold similar views, please let us know so we can continue to support your company and form closer relationships. If your policy is encouraging or enforcing any of the government-led mandates outlined above, please advise us so we can consider the future between our respective companies. We simply cannot support businesses that don't uphold the most basic of human rights.
It's an extraordinary letter. So as a businessman, you're saying to all the companies you deal with, these are our values.
That's right.
Human beings first.
That's right.
Goodness, real kindness
That's
to
right.
human beings first.
Correct.
And if you don't uphold those same values, if you're willing to put in an apartheid system, we may need to renegotiate.
Absolutely. We're going to have a very serious conversation.
What was the response from the businesses you were dealing with to that letter?
Mostly quiet. I don't think there was I don't recall any strong rebuttal, any strong counter-argument, anyone that came back and go, you're off your face. And I think they would have had a very awkward and difficult conversation with me after that, had that been the case. I think maybe culturally, they weren't prepared to confront it because Kiwis don't like confrontation, right? And
to our great cost, as it turns out.
Yeah. Of course, many do, and I don't want to say Kiwi, I don't want to generalise. Many do accept that it's necessary sometimes, but certainly in my experience with the letter, no one came back and tried to attack in any way. I had obviously, what I didn't expect was the level of support that came through, which was just overwhelming.
Tell us about that. What was it like?
Emails just flooded in, messages just flooded in via social media, phone calls. It just went crazy. It was, and that was nice.
And that was
Of
from all
course.
those people facing loss of jobs, potential loss of homes.
Oh, the stories of which, I read them all. And, sometimes you'd read them and you'd go, I shouldn't have to be dealing with this. In the most respectful way to them, but in the sense that this person is hurting badly. And here I am as just director of a property development company, almost having tears come to my eyes, listening to some of the stories about their teenagers and what they're going through. I mean, kids in their teenage years have been robbed, been absolutely robbed. And hearing some of the stories, not not the least of which is my friend Rachel. But hearing some of the stories about their children, about people who have been forced out of jobs, people who were at not quite at retirement age, but it feel like they've been robbed now, and jobs and things they were trying to line up just before they sort of hung up their boots. Some of the stories were heartbreaking. They were, and I didn't expect that. I didn't, and it took me a little bit by surprise, and it was a little overwhelming because it was just coming in left, right, and centre. But of course, not that I sought any kind of recognition or anything from it whatsoever. Of course it's nice when people reach out and reaffirm what you've just done, particularly when you expected the opposite. So in that sense, it was good.
It's incredible what you did. I mean, this to me would mark you out as a leader who would run this country with great humanity. But what is it that you really wanted to come from this? Did you think that it would go out person to person, business to business, and more would stand up than they did? Because so many capitulated, Brian. It was disappointing.
Yeah, I guess you want to do what's right first, and that you hope that in the back of your mind it may inspire others to do the same. But you start with what I need to say, and let's hope that it encourages those who are maybe right on that cusp to go, yeah, I'm just going to hit that send button too, because it's right, irrespective of what happens. And much of the feedback was that.
Yeah, it's a time we will look back and there's no doubt in my mind that each Kiwi will now go, oh, that period defined something in me.
Yeah.
Either cowardice or courage.
Correct.
It's going to be a tough time for some.
Yeah.
Looking back, why didn't I stand up?
Yeah.
What would you say to those people who just thought, I'll just go along to get along, and now they're starting to regret, feel uncomfortable, they've got friends who've died, family members who are injured?
I would say this. I would say, don't beat yourself up. We all make poor decisions at times. I'm the first person to put my hand up. I've made loads of poor decisions in my life. If we didn't have generally humanity wasn't somewhat forgiving, right, which it is, then you'd have something to worry about. But they are. And I would say tomorrow makes a difference. The decisions you make now make a difference, not the ones you made before. So if you were silent, then you look back and go, I learned from that. Tomorrow will be different. And make it different. That's what I'd say to them.
That's a brilliant answer. Come and join and stand together. So what is, if we pull up and look over New Zealand at the macro picture, what is it that you're seeing, Brian? What are you seeing at the moment that is most weighing on your heart right now?
I guess just the echoes of freedom. What's interesting, when I came to New Zealand, and many of my mates will vouch for this, they didn't quite get it, right? But those that really wanted to know, they go, why? Why New Zealand? And I love the Kiwis.
This is 8 years ago. This is 8 years ago.
Yeah. But
so you had a young family.
Yeah, so I had a young family, and we're in Perth, and I saw where Perth was going, and I weighed everything up in the balance, I guess, to some degree. And
where was Perth going? What did you see?
Oh, well, I saw it economically hitting a wall. Back in 2014. We'd had a really good run there, but it's a large mining town, and they pander to the major miners, and I saw that coming to an end, and I said we're either moving east but I wouldn't mind. Convinced my wife to take a sabbatical to New Zealand, and but here's the underlying thing. It wasn't just economic for me. It was very much, I see Australia becoming more and more of a policed nation, and I just like freedom.
Yes.
Call me weird, but that part about self-determination, that part about making my own decisions for me and my family, that part about looking after my own, that part about, thank you, God, you've given me all these things. Now I must use these and use my skills and resources to hopefully expand and create more things, because that's what we're created as, to do. And so coming to New Zealand was like, New Zealand feels like it was Australia was 10 years ago. To me, it felt like when I travelled here, I felt like there's kids jumping off bridges into the water. There'd be some fun police out in Australia telling you not to do that. There's a guy riding down the road on his quad bike. chasing a few things. He was on the road. That you'd be pulled over for that in Australia, like even in rural areas. Like it's just, everything was getting so heavily policed. You just felt like you were getting clammed in.
It was claustrophobic.
It was claustrophobic. And now, of course, and since we've been here, and particularly the last 2 years, New Zealand's played catch up. And but that was initially one of the big things that drove me to New Zealand. Is I love the outdoors. I love the beautiful waterways. You guys have just got it so good when it comes to pristine waterways, but you allow these people to just dump all kinds of stuff into it. You go, New Zealand has just such a pristine backyard. If only you knew what you were sitting on, you'd be steering away from anything that looks like chemicals going into that stuff.
Absolutely.
Anything that gets dumped in it, like it's just diabolical. And so, so I was jealous. I thought, I want a piece of that, and they're all going that way. So I'll jump on the back leg and bring my family over, and we'll go that way. And so, 8 years ago, who would have thought? 6 months sabbatical, 8 years in, we love it.
And was it easy early on? Did you find it easy to get established? Was it that kind of chill Kiwi thing? You were welcomed in? Was it that nice feeling?
They got, New Zealand and Kiwis have their little cliques, but it happens everywhere, you know. And we've got a great group of friends here, and people have been great. I got to say, mostly it's been pretty easy to assimilate. I mean, across the ditch, it's not difficult. Many Kiwis go that way.
Yes.
Almost immediately, there's a connection established on the basis that their son, daughter, uncle, aunt lives in Perth. Do you know them? But
on that note, you actually have quite a lot of that Kiwi vibe in you. To me, I feel like you're a real Kiwi brother.
I'm hoping that's the good traits of Kiwis.
The very good traits, the very good ones. And I asked you this before we came to air. Yeah. You do have a connection, actually, don't you?
I do, I do. So now you're going to ask me to recall it. So basically, Marsden, right?
Yes.
Came here, brought, and they did the Christian
very
missionaries.
much in the far north,
the far
Kerry, Bay of Islands.
Yes, one of my ancestors was involved, and he was one of the dignitaries or something that came also as one of the missionaries. And the name's documented, the family history's documented there. And that was one of my ancestors.
That's really nice.
So there is a connection to New Zealand. I didn't actually know that before I came. My auntie told me when she came over.
Anybody who's trying to say, why should an Aussie come here and tell us what to do? We need to learn from each other. We are Trans-Tasman brothers and sisters who are under assault at the moment. And I think we need to take the best minds from Australia and New Zealand and get people saying, what are we going to do to make a better country, a better life again, even improving on what we had actually, because I think we did all take it for granted. We took freedom for granted. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Oh, listen, I think you're absolutely right. It's that complacency, it's that indifference, it's that she'll be right. Has lots of it in Australia, lots of it. Oh, it's all right, man. She'll be right.
Yeah, overly trusting of our politicians.
Yeah, these are some of the great traits of New Zealand or Kiwis and Aussies is that we proceed with trust. Yeah. We'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Just don't prove me otherwise. And we have, and I think, but that probably has led to some level of complacency. I know, like I mentioned earlier, I truly believe that government just begets bigger government. Government just creates bigger government. And unless there is a conscious effort to keep it in check and to keep it small, then it will constantly grow to a stage where it'll gobble up the people below it. And I think this is, in a macro view, this is what we're dealing with at the moment, is we're dealing with very big government in most Western countries. And the small business owner, who was the heartbeat of any nation, is now struggling. I mean, we're pushing on 40-odd percent tax rates now. Any country that goes over 25%, you might get on its own steam for a little while, but eventually it's heading towards a very, very dark and very bad place economically. And here we are now, paying 39% in tax to a government that just has expanded considerably since being in office. That is not going to get any smaller unless we make some conscious effort to dial it back. Sweet words like centralisation. Let's centralise let's get all of our three waters under this. You know what I mean? Now look from one central source. Those are sweet words and they sound sweet. They sound organised. They sound great. but we are people of community. And no one who's making a decision outside the community generally has the best interest of the people in the community. As soon as you centralise, you have problems. And these are, I think, some of the problems we're seeing right now with New Zealand, which has become a very, very big bureaucracy.
Have you heard numbers on that? I've heard 50,000 more bureaucrats under.
Yeah, I heard
this.
something between 53 and 55,000, correct.
Yep.
Again, don't know that number off the top of my head, but that's what I had heard.
The person who told me said something even more shocking. They said, with each new bureaucrat, you get a family, and you get a family of voters for that government.
Correct.
So they're bringing 50,000, it could be 100,000 voters for Labor. So you keep bloating and bloating and bloating up the government.
That's right.
The opposite is what, Brian? What is a really good-looking government in your mind? A really useful, serving the people, making a better country kind of government?
Well, I think it starts by trimming it back.
Yeah.
I don't think you can cut it altogether. And whilst I have probably some degree of libertarian sort of views on very small government, I don't think you get there overnight. I think sensible means making conscious decisions in public policy, in fiscal policy, to go, how do we trim? How do we trim? And we hand back to small business, and we hand back to medium business, and allow business to grow. Take away some of this red tape. Rely on what a free market looks like. Free markets, we spoke about beautiful things before, right? We spoke about speaking beauty, right? And when you say something, there's something in it. Free markets are like that. They just self-govern. They look after themselves. We are too quick to let government step in where free markets would have resolved the matter. But we allow the politicians to convince us that if they get involved, then they'll fix it. And unfortunately, that's the part where government gets bigger, is they're constantly playing Mr. Fix-It, and we all know what happens there. They stuff everything up that they touch. Whereas if you just let free markets go, we'd all be paying a lot less tax. We'd all be having a lot more abundance for us and our children, and we'd have a lot smaller government who just does their jobs. Take out our bins maybe, right? Fix our roads, and just be the referee a little bit, but we make sure you don't go too far. Keep them in check so that we can have a good, honest, robust economy.
So I can hear all the woke left saying, but trickle down never happened when we tried this in the 80s, and there was lots of suffering and lots of poverty. What do you say to those arguments? I know what I say.
Well, please. Furnish me with your response. What would you say?
Well, we're seeing massive poverty now.
Yeah,
We're seeing so many ma and pa businesses gone to the wall.
Correct.
We're seeing the middle class almost obliterated, and it was the middle class that was this amazing engine that pushed New Zealand forward.
That's right.
What's your reply to that?
Listen, I agree. I think a strong middle class keeps authority in check.
Yes.
Authority doesn't want that.
No.
We want you to do as we say, not as we do. So effectively, if you attack the middle class, then you're literally cutting them off at the knees, and that's what's been happening. I think there is no perfect snapshot of history to show where it's perfect per se, but there is absolutely little triggers in there and little places in there where we can see there was beauty in what happened there. That was right. That was good. Small business was allowed to flourish because all of these restrictions were taken away. People were able to accumulate wealth and sort of pass that on. There was more education in the homes, less left up to the state and state education, right? So in other words, encouraging homes to raise your families, right? Bring children up with morals, ethics. They know where those boundaries are. That's the next generation. People don't let governments do what they can do themselves, which is often the problem. I think by doing that and having a strong middle class, we can keep authorities in check. It will never be perfect. Nothing ever is. We live in an imperfect world. But if we allow the government to get big and then they end up doing this sort of stuff, partnering with media, particularly legacy media, let me be clear on that, as they become has-beens, they sell out to the cheapest bidder, which is the government. As that happens, right, we see those two partnering and undermining democracy, undermining good business practice, a free market economy, and of course the inevitable what comes from that, which is wealth and prosperity of the middle class.
I think that puts it so well. Without an active media questioning politicians every single day, why are you doing this? What's the benefit? Why are you not accountable for what you did last week? Democracy dies, doesn't it?
100%, yeah, democracy dies. And it's on its last breaths now.
Yeah.
It's on its last breaths. If we don't resuscitate it, then it's something we'll talk about. The kids remember when.
You have this ebullience to you, Brian. You have this sort of innate optimism. I can just feel it. Do you feel it's going to die, or do you feel there is a lot that we as a people can do? You talked about stand up today, stand up tomorrow. What is it that we can do?
Listen, I think I'm a realist, but mixed in with a good degree of optimism, for sure. The realist in me says right now we have given them an upper hand.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've been a small dog in many big fights, and I'm sure other people watching this have been as well. You can always do more than what you think you can do when you actually step out and take a little bit of faith in yourself and those around you. It's amazing what people can do when it's not just about a belief in yourself as well, when you believe in others. That's the critical part most people think. They think self-belief's the biggest. No, what I believe you're capable of is actually probably beyond what you think you're capable of. I think you're capable of much, much more than what you're doing now, just in the short time I've met you. And there's something in us having belief in each other that I think will see us come together and push back, and we'll have more strength than we know what to do with. But it's about people putting egos and things like that behind and going, let's get serious. Let's be really clear here. We do not want big government anymore. We don't want that. We don't want government overlords telling us how to live our lives. Thank you, respectfully, but no thank you.
Yep.
I'm not putting that on my window. I'm not putting that on my door. I'm not putting that mask on my kid. I'm not putting it on my face. I'm not putting that in my arm.
Yeah.
Okay? They're all things I do not agree with, and I don't need to explain why, but thank you.
That is so profound. That point about believing in others too. Because what is big government? It's very parasitic. It tries to suck energy and confidence away from people.
Yeah.
You can't decide. You don't know the best. We will tell you what to do. Even now, as we saw in the last 2 years, to the point of we'll tell you what to do in your body.
Yeah.
When many of us know, and many have said to me, I knew I shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do it, but I just didn't feel that powerful. I couldn't stand up. Many of us have known we need to keep saying no to this overreach.
Correct. You control that. Let your yeses be your yeses and let your noes be your noes. That's biblical.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Say no. Not doing it. I'm reminded of a time when we were in the US, and we'd flown to Panama, and we were on our way back. This is an interesting time for us because we decided we're heading back to New Zealand. And so within about 24 hours, we were getting on flights. And of course, up came the mask. And I'd been reminded all the way through, right, to put a mask on into the Panamanian airport before we even boarded the flight, to which I was resisting the whole way. But then we get on the flight and they tell me, listen, your child, anyone over the age of 2 needs to wear a mask. I'm getting on with my then 3-year-old daughter. And I said, not happening. And they said, we have to. Well, I'm sorry, but she's not wearing a mask, and even if I wanted her to, it's not going to happen. She'll rip it straight off. She's 3 years old. That's ridiculous. And so we managed to get past the next gatekeeper and into our seats, but it then escalated. And I had the first guy come back and initially tell me, listen, okay, I understand. Right? After him and I went to and fro, and I said, I'm not shooting the messenger, but I'm just saying she's not wearing one. It's just not happening. I'm not putting a mask on my daughter. And even then he had to keep reminding me to lift mine up because I just, whatever.
You wanted to breathe oxygen, not carbon dioxide.
Correct, yeah. And long story short, obviously some of the ladies, the air hostesses had it in for me at this point now. And he then came back up after they'd been into the pilot and said, sir, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to get off the flight. Now, I'm a family of 6, myself, my wife, and 4 children, right? And I said, well, it's not happening. So you can remove you if you like. And then he came back and said, no, it is happening, you need to get off. And so I sat there for a while longer, resisting. And I said, tell the pilot if he wants me off, which he's given the directive to come and talk, but he wouldn't. He wanted to hide behind. A very long story short, we got kicked off that flight, and I had to get all my bags, my wife, my children, one of which was asleep in her arms, our little 1-year-old girl. She was asleep, and my wife tearing up. She wasn't not happy, of course. I was probably public enemy number one for a little bit there. And I walked off, and I was having all kinds of conscience things going on in that moment. It was hard. We got off, didn't know what was going to happen at this point. Again, one of those decisions, I don't know what's happening on the other side, but it's right. Some would say pick your fights. I felt like I picked it right. And I felt like this was the right, not masking her up. We got out, police, interviewed. They were fine. Just said, listen, the guy came back out and said, listen, you've got to, we'll get you, hopefully get back on another flight, but Brian, you've got to do this. Turns out, after having this discussion with him, they agreed to allow her to fly without any mask. Okay, and so we got on the next flight. So that was good. But the better part was when I got on that plane, my youngest boy, Carter, he had to write, they had all these colour-in books and things about your trip and what you've been up to and this, that and the other, and they got those. He'd been writing in it. And half an hour into the flight, I've been reading a book, listening to some music, hands it to me, Dad, read this. Second page in, it said, what was one of the highlights, recent highlights of your trip? And written there by my little then 8-year-old was when Dad stood up for what was right. And it was at that moment, I think a little bit of sand flew in through the window and got me in the eye, you know. It was at that moment, I of course handed that straight to my wife. But
that is amazing.
Therein, it reinforced to me is as adults, they're watching. They're watching how we respond. They're watching what we do. They're watching how we speak out and how we stand up. And whilst it feels uncomfortable at the time, we went through a bit of pain, and I went through a bit of pain with my wife. My wife realised later that he did the right thing. She couldn't see it at the time, but he did the right thing, and certainly that will hopefully last with my boy too, so that moving forward he becomes the ones that can say what's right. And I think that's what we need, is we just need people to go make the decision, say and do what's right, irrespective of what's on the other side.
That is a very, very special story to share with us all. Thank you.
My pleasure.
That must have been a moment for you as a dad. That must have been a moment.
I've had a lot of non-proud moments as a dad, but that was one of my prouder ones for sure.
That's amazing. Where did your courage come from, Brian? Was your father the same?
Yeah, my father's a pretty strong-headed guy, as is my mother. She's no pushover. And so maybe I got a bit from both. I'm not sure, but I didn't like hearing people say, yeah, gonna, or yeah, you shoulda, or woulda.
Yeah.
If you're going to say it or do it, do it. So.
It's a deeper layer too. It's that thing I had right from the beginning. I'm going to check in with my own moral code. I'm going to check in with my own values. I don't care what these societal values, these new societal values are. They feel wrong. They feel bullying. My own father stood up against apartheid in South Africa, big time, when it wasn't cool, when I was little. And I'm just going to check in, and if it doesn't feel right, I'm checking in with me, and I'll be true to me.
Did that instill something in you?
Very much, seeing my father do that.
Yeah,
very much. That's the gift we can give on to the next generation.
Correct. And look at the changes you're making and the things you're doing as a result.
What a gift you gave your children. And this we remind again, all Kiwis can do this from this moment on. It's never too late, is it? You stand up now and you go, this government is not doing right by me or my family or my community, and I'm standing up. That's what we can all do right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And you will know what you can do and what's within your control. Don't, I guess, hesitate when you don't know what's on the other side. That's what I would say.
Yep.
That would be my line. I'd say you've got things you can do, but hesitation stops you from doing most of them. Don't.
Check in.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk economy. I'd like your take as a businessman on how we can pull back this absolutely wobbling New Zealand economy. It has been so mismanaged, and many Kiwis are seeing that. Our farmers are on the brink of God knows what, that many of them are very shaky. Are we going to be forced off our farms by these ridiculous government regulations? Again, government overreach, farting taxes. We're a laughingstock overseas.
Yeah.
Where would you start with such a mess, Brian, as a business person, a business head? What would you do?
It's hard to give a single answer to that.
Very hard.
We're great. As humans are great at making things complex.
Yeah.
And we've made an incredibly complex system around us that that requires some unwinding. There are some simple factors that I would say, and I apologise to the audience if they feel like I just go macro all of a sudden, but I tend to just do that rather than go, listen, let's cut interest rates by so many basis points, or let's print more money and put it in, whatever. I'm going to talk more about the fact that I think there is, we all support either silently or vocally certain things that the government want to put into place. I would say let's not support it and let's be more vocal. It's just those two simple things. Because right now, particularly anything that seeks to centralise power, sometimes there's things I use just as a bit of a yardstick to go, is this something I would support? How much detail do you know about it? You go, well, not much. You go, well, does it centralise power? Yes, it does. Well, I'm not supporting it. Simple, right?
Very simple.
Okay. So in other words, we want to give the DHB the ability to decide what goes in and out of our water. So would I support that? How much detail do I know? Nothing, but I know enough because it centralises power. Simple. It's a simple answer for me. No. Don't want to know about it. Encourage people to be more, and not only that, policy to be more independent. So that puts the power back into the hands of the people. Again, if we saw governments that said, listen, let's encourage solar, let's encourage people, getting their own water, looking after their own treatment, stuff like that. Inevitably, councils want you on all their infrastructure because they spend so much on it. And the reason they spend so much on it is because it's a council. If it was free enterprise, we would have got away for about a quarter of the price.
So you'd have water tanks on every property that could afford it.
I honestly would say, you know what, I want you to be self-sufficient.
Oh, wouldn't that be a marvellous government?
I would encourage you to be self-sufficient, and in some way we will encourage developers to make people self-sufficient. In eaves, in tanks that sit under eaves, in power that's powered from roofs, at least most of your usage, you have independence. You're not dependent on any government infrastructure. Take the heat off us, right, and reduce people's rates, right. Give more freedom and money back to the people. Keep more in their pockets. It's fairly simple, really. But encourage independence, discourage centralisation of anything, asset control, obviously treatments, and let's talk about the biodiversity stuff and the fact that they're trying to protect things, but they come in and they drop 1080 indiscriminately.
Absolutely.
Like all over the place. That's another example. You centralised control. Should have been able to answer that one easy. I don't care for an argument about whether 1080 is good, bad or indifferent. What I care about is centralising control of something. People got possum problem, deal with it yourself. Get together in your community and figure out how to deal with it. Get people working together again in their community because they'll decide what's best for their land. Someone will stand up and go, that affects my crops, guys, because it's XYZ, right? And they'll work it out. Stop giving this because it's a problem back to governments. And then that means get to know your neighbour again. Get to know your neighbour. Reach over the fence, say good day. Invite them around, say, hey, that's weird, but it might seem weird because we've been here for 10 years, but I'm inviting you around for the first time for a barbecue. Come around, get to know your neighbours. Governments do not want people right now getting to know their neighbours.
And we had that in the lockdown. She
Correct.
actually said, do not talk to your neighbours.
Correct.
There was something very dark about that.
Very. Yeah. Very dark, very sinister. And it encourages snitching when when chips are down. If people know each other. Instead of
cooperation.
There's cooperation. I wouldn't do that because Brian, they know each other.
Yeah.
So I would say, do it. That's a simple, practical thing you can do today. Invite them around.
It's absolutely beautiful. I remember being at the Freedom Village, and that was an example. It was just, did you get there with the kids? It was brilliant in February.
I didn't,
it was brilliant.
No.
But it just bubbled up from the ground.
Austin.
It wasn't being ruled from on top. There wasn't someone every day saying, you'll do this, you'll do that. People were going, I think we need to do this.
Yeah.
Let's get a group of us and get it done.
Yeah.
But I remember looking and thinking, imagine if we could get this centralised model back to communities. And somebody came in who wanted to sell, I don't know, a poison, say. And they would have to go to each small community. They'd have to work a lot harder than going to one centralised point.
That's right.
In Wellington, in New Zealand, and say,
Correct.
I want my poison to go out through you across the country.
Correct.
Much, much harder to corrupt if you've got
That's
a lot
right.
of small communities, isn't it?
Correct. When you've got big government and you've got lobbyists,
Yep.
very easy to corrupt. Very easy.
It wouldn't be hard. Some people say it's taken 15 years to get to this level of corruption of our system, breaking this beautiful little country. And so it'll take 15 years to undo it. I say no. What's your say? What do you? I don't think it would be hard in a country of 5 million with lots of entrepreneurial spirits if we could build up our people again. What's your feeling?
I think anything's possible. It really comes down to people's ability to act and people's desire. And maybe I hope we're reaching that tipping point where people go, enough's enough. Even for me, this has gone too far.
Yes.
This wokeism's gone too far. This stuff that they're teaching our children, what they're doing with Three Waters, what they're doing, enough. I'm hoping people have reached that threshold, because when you a critical mass of people do, which doesn't need to be, when I say critical mass, people think above 50%, doesn't need to be a significant share in that respect. It just needs to be, it could be sort of 5-6%. I think revolutions are started on a lot less, right? You get a small percentage of the population that just go, enough. The large percentage of the rest are indifferent. They'll probably go either way. They'll see it start, and it'll gain momentum in that group anyway. So you just get a small percentage of population that just go, that's it. I think you'll see dramatic change in this country like you've never seen, because people have got the wish, they've got the desire, they're acting, and nothing will stop them at that point.
And there's been a sense of being so suppressed, even our communications. So let's bring in here, we started with media.
Yeah.
And we've alluded to media being crucial to democracy. Imagine a flowering of ideas and sharing of ideas through our media. What would you love to see in our media, Brian? What would you like to... How could media, in your view, serve the rebuild of democracy in this country?
Well, I think they can start by better shaping public discourse in the way they avoid labels. They want to avoid having certain labels on things that suit their agenda. But I say avoid labels altogether.
Yes.
Allow people to speak without pouncing down their throat or calling them this, that and the other. We're complex. In some ways we're simple, but really we are complex human beings. To label someone that you barely know is, I think, it does nothing for democracy. It does nothing for the person. It does nothing for democracy. And if anything, goes a great way towards undermining it. And so I think the media really just needs to go, stop playing tactics to serve your own interests and the interests of your donors, or the people that pay your wages, and go back to that where we started. Let's go back to true journalism, investigative, have some pride in what you do, and go, irrespective of what these people above say, I'm operating in accordance, pursuant to that there, which is my code of ethics. Tell me I'm doing the wrong thing.
Brilliant.
And journalists, I think, need to get back to that. If we saw that, then they would go home, sleep straight in bed at night going, I did the right thing, and it feels good. And that's what I want to see in the media. That's what I want to see, in general, public discourse. Be good.
I absolutely agree about the labels. They've become so divisive and so brutal and so dismissive. There's that wonderful adage too. Have you heard, I may not agree with what you say, but I will die to support your right to say it.
And I'm so glad. I am so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because here's why I'm glad. There's been probably about 6-7 people in the last 5 years who have said that to me. Only one has actually stood by it and has proven that he actually means it. And this is a shout out to Wayne Wright. Even though we may disagree on how Sean performed in that interview, Wayne, in several social settings, when he did not have to, and there was no gain to be made by doing so, has stood up and said, hang on, We must protect people's right, have a right to be heard. May not agree with them, but I'll protect their right to say it. And I, without going into the specific examples, because they're kind of probably a bit sensitive to him, and so respectfully to him, that's what I would still say. I will continue to give the platform the benefit of the doubt, because I will say I know the heart behind it. He still, even though him and I disagree potentially on vaccines, for example, and he still respects my right to say my piece and to disagree, and we are still mates. It doesn't need to be the other way around. And so yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's so important.
That's the New Zealand we used to have. Mates could totally come from different sides.
Correct.
And yet like each other very much and respect their differences.
Yeah.
That's what we have to get back to.
Yeah.
That's also really important when I ask you this next question. If you met Jacinda Ardern and you had a couple of minutes of her time,
Yeah.
would you have a message? And if so, could you look down that camera and use her name and say, Jacinda, this is what I'd say to you. If I met you in this room,
Yeah.
and you were here, Jacinda, just use her name.
Yeah, well, I would say if I did meet Jacinda, I'd probably say some similar words than what I said earlier. And I'd say, Jacinda, you've got to be hand on heart. You've got to sleep straight in bed at night. You've got to know that what you are doing is not just saying you're acting in the best interests of New Zealand and Kiwis, but is acting in the best interests. You have a privileged position, and you need to be honourable in the way you approach your work. And I think that if you were honest, that forgiveness would be on the other side of it. But you would need to be honest with yourself and with the New Zealand population, and say and do what it is you speak very eloquently, I might add. But we're no fools. Don't play us to be them, right? Not here and not over the Tasman. We see through that facade. But hear those words and act on them, and show us the true Jacinda, and who knows what forgiveness may lay on the other side, from God and from us.
Wow. And a lot of people saying there's no chance Jacinda will get in after the next election. So for Chris Luxon, have you got a message for him? Because he isn't practiced yet in all the political games, as she is, steeped in them. He needs to learn from the debacle of this. What advice, if he came to you and said, Brian, give me a bit of advice so I can be a better leader, what would you be saying, Chris Luxon, down that
Chris,
camera?
I hope there's enough subject matter in what we've just discussed for you to start thinking about things differently. Start thinking about manhood, masculinity, who you are, what you stand for, the people you serve, your family, your friends, the pace you'll leave, and what sort of legacy you'll leave behind. Or whether or not you just want to play politics and go down in history as something very different. You also have the opportunity, and I would say a very unique opportunity, to really hold the present-day government to account, to chart a new course, to do things differently, and to make a name for yourself as someone who has the backbone to make the hard decisions. And don't worry, we'll know whether they're right. New Zealand will know. Again, as I said to Jacinda, they are no fools. And stop being silent on many of the big topics of our time. The elephants in the room, we want you to speak about them. We want you to be a voice. And we want you to show us what small government looks like, which is really what National stood for. Is it stood for small business. It stood for prosperity, for all those democratic pillars that we've been talking about, freedom of speech. You see an attack on these things. Don't be ignorant. Do the right thing as a man.
Brian, in 2.5 years, I have felt very sad after a lot of interviews. I've felt very moved, very lost, very angry, but I have seldom felt as utterly inspired as I feel after this interview. It's been an absolute honour.
Thank you.
Talking to you. And I would ask you to take out New Zealand citizenship. I think a lot of Kiwis would vote for you if you stood seriously. You have leadership all over you. You care deeply. You're a humanitarian and you're fearless. You have so many of the qualities this country needs.
Well, it's very kind. It's a privilege of mine as well to obviously be interviewed by you and to get to know you more as well. So thank you very much for coming and sharing some time in my home.
Thank you, Brian Gillett.
Thank you.